Today we're going to look at how corals feed, particularly the phylum Cnidaria, of which corals are just one member with a single orifice acting as both mouth and anus. Tentacles surround the mouth and have stinging cells, nematocysts, and two layers of epithelial cells separated by a jelly-like mesoglia. And for corals, they get their nutrition in several ways, capturing food with the barbs from the stinging cells in tentacles, and gain food from symbiotic algae who will live in the coral polyp, by sharing some nutrients with different members of their colony, and by gaining some nutrients directly from seawater itself if they're dissolved in them. And this is a polyp, and thousands, millions of them make colonies. And these tiny, tiny polyps have a central mouth with a stomach lined by a gastrodermis, and the tentacles have stinging cells. And if we look more closely at a tentacle, can't really see it even on here, they're covered with these stinging cells on the outer epidermis. And the animals that they're eating, the zooplankton, are out at night, so they normally feed at night. And these tentacles, if you can see those orange ovals, they extend out from the polyp in the coral to catch food, zooplankton and other small animals. And if we look very closely at the circle on the left, and then the inner circles, you're looking at a tiny section of the outer layer, the outer epidermis, and the nematocysts are found in the very outer layer. And what are they capturing? They're capturing zooplankton, but they only make up about 30% of a coral polyp's food. Now, these have been enlarged 10 times. They're barely 1 millimeter, and it says check your ruler for the size of 1 millimeter, and it gives a list of what the different numbered ones are. And then if we look more closely at that very outer layer, we're going to look in the circle at the greener next layer down, but the outer layer have these barbs that are attached by a thread, and they're retracted into the cell until they're stimulated by something touching them. And here's what happens. Number one, that's a dormant nematocyst, stimulated by something touching it. The cover flap flies out, barb shoots out on a thread, injects a poisonous liquid, and then moves the zooplankton to the mouth opening of the coral polyp, and then will recoil to repeat the exercise. And looking more about feeding, on the diagram on the right, the greeny layer, the cells, they have algae in them, zooxanthellae, and those algae are symbiotic animals algae within the outer layer, and they are helping each other out. And here's another diagram looking at the photosynthetic algae. So a lot of them are green, some of them are brown, and the mutualistic relationship, the coral protects the algae and gives some of the materials that they need for photosynthesis. The coral polyps themselves cannot photosynthesize. So the zooxanthellae, as a product of photosynthesis, have glucose, oxygen. They also help remove waste and help provide other food materials like glycerol and amino acids. And they also help produce some of the coral building calcium carbonate as well. And we're looking here, and look closely, you can see green algae in the left-hand photograph and some orangey brown ones in the right-hand one. And on the left, you can see the regular photosynthesis equation of carbon dioxide and water giving glucose and oxygen. The same process that leaves utilize in their photosynthesis. Now, as much as 90% of the organic material that the algae manufacture is transferred to the host. So it requires sunlight, so it's going to happen in daylight hours and in the upper levels of the ocean. And so you get the particular colors of the corals here. Obviously brown and green are big ones, but there are some other ones we'll see in a moment. But when corals become stressed, the polyps expel the algal cells, and that's known as coral bleaching. The polyp's still there, but it's just lost up to 90% of its food source, so it's significantly stressed. Here are some amazing coloured ones near the Maldives. And so just a review that shallow reef-building corals have zooxanthellae, algae, that provide as much as 90% of the organic materials photosynthetically. And shallower than 70 meters, some places say 50 meters, though having said that, I don't dive usually as deep to even 50 meters. And coral feed on the zooplankton by shooting the barbs from the nematocysts. Some food, number 3, is obtained directly from seawater. Soluble materials will pass through the stomach lining. And some very smaller aquatic animals, smaller than the zooplankton, are caught in the mucus on the tentacles, and smaller hairs, cilia, move them towards the mouth. So many thanks for learning about how corals feed with Washington International School of Team Science.